Hey everyone, and welcome. I'm Joe Brady, and I'm really looking forward to showing you some cool stuff today. We're going to talk about photographing products for websites, eBay, Etsy, whatever need you might have. I'm going to show you some cool gear and some cool tips that will allow you to do that. So what is our goal today? What we want to do is photograph some products and make them attractive and color accurate. Why? Well, customers who order based on what they see online get what they are expecting, and that makes for a happy customer. Let's take a look at a couple of images as an example. Now, first of all, I've seen a lot of people just use smartphones, and this is just a coffee cup and a watch taken with my iPhone. Yeah, it shows the product, but isn't anywhere near as attractive as something shot in like the cocoon I have behind me, like this one right here. Also, when you're photographing jewelry, sometimes you might want to have a little bit more light. So let's take a look at a piece where there's no light underneath. It's just being illuminated from the top. Yes, again, it shows you, but by putting a light underneath and shining it through, it has so much more impact. It really makes it look more attractive. Now, for larger items, or really anything, you also have the option where you can cut out the background and just apply a plain background. However, by adding a light coming from behind, it really adds a lot of dimension to the product and gives it more of a three-dimensional look. Also, treat your products as if they're portraits. You're creating a little portrait of an item. Now here's a figurine that I had at my house, and I wanted to add a little bit more of a portrait light. Yes, this is a very flat light and it's well illuminated, but if we just move the light in the cocoon back a little bit, we create almost a little bit of a short lighting on the figurine, which makes it more look like a portrait. And it's simply done by literally as something easy as just pushing the light back a little bit. So what's the gear we're using and why are we using it? First of all, I've got a cocoon system here. And if you take a look down here, you can see I've got my camera. It's got a couple of holes in it, whether I want to shoot straight on, at an angle, or I've actually got the top hole covered with a piece of paper right now, shooting directly down through the top. The cocoon provides an even bath of diffuse light, and you can get very different looks by simply changing the position and the number of lights on the cocoon. Now, there's two sizes of cocoon available. The medium, which is called the 70, which is right here, and you'll see the large 130 a little bit later. And I'll use the same lights on either one. Now, the kit comes with two lights. I've added a third light underneath so that I can illuminate that piece and gives it kind of that floating feeling. I really like that look. Now, after our cocoon system, I've got an X-Rite Colorchecker Passport. This allows me a white balance standard and a color standard, and it provides me the ability to create a custom camera profile so that I'm going to get accurate and consistently reproducible color. And I'll show you how this works in software in a little bit. Next, a light meter. Now, for this shoot, I primarily used my little favorite. This is a Sekonic L-308S, and yes, I've got a green one. You can't get these anymore. Don't you wish you had a green one? Now they come in one color, black. If you're doing more than just continuous light photography like this, or you're looking for a meter for your studio, I've also got the Sekonic 478DR here. It has the ability also to fire your flashes remotely. So depending on what it is your needs are, either the 308 for more basic needs, or a little more robust studio meter, the 478. A tripod, very important piece. Your exposures, in order to get maximum depth of field, are going to mean low shutter speeds. Even though on the video these lights might look very bright, I just metered it a second ago, when I wanted to get f20 to have everything in focus from front to back, it gave me a reading of 1/8 of a second. So not something you can handhold. Also, by having it on a tripod, it's always in the same position. And if you always place your product in the same position, you really can keep your flow going and you can capture a lot of images in a short period of time. Now, also, I'm using Lightroom 5. A couple reasons for that. One of them is it allows me to shoot directly tethered into the computer. It allows me to apply to that direct tether a custom camera profile, white balance, any kind of corrections I want to apply, I can have them done as each image is sent into the computer. And that includes sharpening and contrast enhancements if you think they're needed. Again, I'll show you how to do this as well. Now, some optional stuff. Photoshop CS6 or Creative Cloud, You could get by with 5 as well. If you need to do heavy editing, if you want to do compositing, if you want to do special effects, text overlays, that kind of thing, will allow you to do that. You could also get by with Photoshop Elements. I also like to use a tether cable. I've got this long orange USB cable. This is from Tether Tools. It also has a piece on it called the jerk stopper, which you'll see in detail in just a second. That protects the USB port on my camera. The camera I'm using is a Sony Alpha 99. Yes, also you'll see probably more camera than we need for this type of photography. But the beauty is with this articulating screen on the back of the camera, I can have the camera down low and I don't have to get down on my knees for the framing and exposure. I get to see live everything that happens right here. So let's get everything set up. We're going to prepare for our product shoot. Let's take a trip to my home studio and put everything together. So here we are in my kind of basement combination, man cave, entertaining area, studio, classroom. And what I really wanted to show you was you don't need a lot of space for this setup. Now, here's the entire thing. I've got the cocoon here. I've got 2 lights. I'm even going to add in a 3rd light in a little bit. But before we start shooting, we need to get all the pieces in place. So I've got my Sony Alpha 99 here. Do you need this level of camera for this kind of photography? Really, the answer is no, you don't. You do want to have a camera, however, that can shoot RAW, because we're going to take advantage of what the Colorchecker Passport is going to do, and we'll see that in action in a little bit. Also a little later, just to show the point, I'm going to shoot with my Sony NEX7. This camera also can shoot RAW. It's got this small little pancake lens will let me to get in close. Both of these cameras have a lot more resolution than we need typically for this kind of photography. Most of the times this stuff's going to end up on a website or online. So we've got 24 megapixel cameras here, and we're going to be making images that are going to use maybe 1/10 the size of the resolution we're capturing. So we don't need actually to have a specialty lens. We don't need to use a macro lens for this. I'm just going to use a standard 24-70 on here. It's going to allow me to get fairly close to small things like earrings, but back up to capture the entire inside of the cocoon as well. So if you take a look over here, also as I mentioned, I'm shooting tethered. I've got a Tether Tools USB cable going from my Sony into my Mac laptop. I'm shooting directly into Lightroom. The advantage of this will be it's going to speed up the workflow, and I'm going to have my color corrections done as they come into the computer. It's very cool, really saves you a lot of time. On the side here, I've got a nifty little item that you may have seen before. This is called a jerk stopper, also from Tether Tools. What it does is it wraps into the side of your camera, into the strap support, and then wraps around the USB cable. And what this does is it keeps you from accidentally ripping it out of the side of the camera. Really handy because you don't want to damage this USB port in the side of your camera. So a couple little accessories that are really cool, make life easy. Again, we're shooting tethered directly into Lightroom. All right, so the first step we need to do after we've got our camera connected to our computer is we need to figure out what our exposure is for inside the cocoon. This isn't time when your camera's meter is going to absolutely fail. We're shooting into this bright white area. We're going to put jewelry and small objects in there. If you go by what the camera says, you're going to be grossly underexposed. It's kind of like shooting into snow. Remember, your camera's meter is going to look at the scene and try to average it to middle gray. We can't have that happening. We need the correct exposure for this because we want consistency. Now, there's going to be some variations depending on the things you shoot, but we want to be very close so that we can keep our editing to a minimum. So to that end, what I've got here is I've got my Sekonic L-308S meter. Now, I have the lime green one. You missed out. You can't get these anymore, but they only come in one color, black. The green one shows up cool in the video, don't you think, though? Plus, it kind of matches my shirt. So what I need to do is take a meter reading inside the cocoon. And I'm going to turn on both of my lights, and I'm going to place this, I'm just going to put it on the bottom of the cocoon, take a reading, and we'll see what we get. So the first thing we need to do is find out exactly how much light is falling right in here, because this is where our pieces are going to be. So I've got the meter here. I've got it set for 100 ISO because we want the best quality possible. I'm going to try to get my hand out of the way as much as possible, at least out of the dome. Hit the button, and you can see right there, I've got a 1/10 of a second at f/22. Now I might come down to, f/20, something like that, and we see 1/13 of a second at f/20. So there's our reading. That's what we put in the camera, and that's going to be a perfect exposure for anything put right in this area. So the next step is to take a picture of the color checker in the cocoon. This is going to allow us to create a custom camera profile for these lights, and that's going to make sure that our color is going to be perfect. All right, so we've got the color checker inside the cocoon. I know my number. I know it's 1/13 of a second at f/20 at 100 ISO, and that's what the meter told me. Since I'm at a 1/13 of a second, I don't want to actually touch the camera. So what I'm using is a cable release. It's an electronic cable release. It's just a generic one. So I just set my camera on a 1/13 of a second, because that's what my meter told me. I'm at 100 ISO at f/20. I'm tethered into Lightroom. All I have to do is just hit the release button. Takes the picture, sends it off into Lightroom. Now from there, we can go into Lightroom and set up our presets so that we get a custom profile, so that the colors are adjusted and we get our perfect white balance. And this happens now for every image that will be captured, and we're going to see them on the screen in a very close to finished state. Okay, so we've seen our setup. Do you have to have all of that gear? No. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a complete setup, and you can pick and choose from the pieces that you might need. You might decide you only need a cocoon or maybe just the lights, but having a complete kit gives you all of the assets for pretty much any situation. Now, a couple more questions before we continue on. And again, if you joined us late, take advantage of the chat room. We've got some great people in there answering some of your questions, and I'm taking some of the questions live that I think apply to everyone that's here today. First of all, someone mentioned that they have a 478 DR, and it doesn't seem to measure right with the Nikon D7100. Now, I've done some webinars on this, and it sounds like what you need to do is run through the Sekonic's DTS software. That's where that allows you to have the meter learn exactly how your camera sees light. Because remember, every camera sees neutral differently, it sees exposure, it sees middle gray differently. The DTS software allows your meter to find out exactly how your camera thinks exposure and color should be done, and captures the entire tonal range as well. So give that a try. That should fix. I found some cameras can be a half a stop over to a half a stop underexposed based on a standard meter reading. So the DTS software in the 478 and the 758 anyway allows you to teach the meter what your camera thinks is the correct exposure. Someone asked about 18% gray card or white card for white balance, and a couple different solutions for that. Now, I have the X-Rite Sekonic version of the Colorchecker Passport, which has both the gray card and a almost white card. Technically, cameras like this white card. Years ago, everybody decided to use an 18% gray. Now they've gone to white for their white balance. Can you still use 18% gray card? Yes. However, this white is not actually white. If you looked at it very closely, it's a little bit off-white. It's got a little bit of light gray in it. The thing you have to be careful is you can't overexpose when you're going to capture that shot for the white balance. You've got to have a good exposure. If you clip a channel, then your white balance is going to be off. So that's why some people prefer to go to the gray. But I do like this. Just be careful of your exposure. Use a meter. You won't have to worry about it. Okay, someone asked, I mentioned that in one case I was using f/20, and someone said, what do I do about refraction? Some lenses don't perform well on either end of their aperture settings. This lens goes from 2.8 to f/22. This is a Zeiss lens. I can go to f/22 or 2.8 and there's no issues. It is perfectly clean through the entire range. Less expensive lenses, lenses with coatings that maybe are not as optimized as this particular lens is, start to give you trouble when you stop all the way down or open all the way up. So you might find that you need to go to f/16 instead of f/20 or maybe even f/11. That's something you'll have to test with your lens. I know with this particular lens, I can go down to f/22 with no trouble. Someone asked, will Lightroom 4 do the auto color and white balance just like I shoot in Lightroom 5? The answer to that is yes. You just need to create a preset. And in fact, we're going to show you that in just a second. All right, let's continue on. Now, what I want to talk about next is getting the exposure and the color perfect. We're going to see what the color checker does, and we're going to use the meter. Now the color checker is going to allow us to create a custom camera profile, which works in concert with the white balance. You have to have both of them, not just the one. White balance will give you a neutral, but a custom camera profile will correct for any color variations in the spectrum of the light, or maybe something like the cocoon or other reflective items you're using are changing the color spectrum of the light. So let's take a look. So why do we need to use a color checker with these lights? Well, we could use just use a white balance card, and that'll get us pretty close. However, we're shooting some small items, some colorful items, some jewelry. And if you want to sell this stuff online, color is really critical. Because if you get a customer that's buying a piece of jewelry and they're expecting a certain blue, for example, and then when they receive it, it looks different, they're not going to be happy. What the color checker does is it corrects for changes in the spectrum of the lights. For example, I've tested these bow and stream lights. They're really nice lights. They're right around 5,000 K or so. And the white balance will fix for that. However, any artificial light like this has dips and bumps in the spectrum of light that it puts out. And I found that the standard Adobe profile, when I apply it to these lights, there's a little bit of blue missing, a little bit weakened blue, and a little bit of weakened orange. By taking a shot of the color checker and creating a custom profile for that, it corrects for that. So all of the colors snap right into place. So the image that you see on your screen, again, provided your screen is calibrated, is going to be perfect match to the piece we're actually photographing. And that's what we're after, because when people get what they're seeing on the screen, they're going to be happy with their purchase, and that's the whole goal. You want to sell more, right? Let's create a custom camera profile for our light. So here's what we do. We've taught a shot of our color checker. Simply go up to File, Export with Preset, and you'll see the Colorchecker Passport listed there. And this will show up as soon as you install the software. Now give your profile a name. I'm going to call it, I'll name it after what we're doing. We have the Bowen's Cocoon, and I'm shooting a Sony Alpha 99. Of course, I have to spell it correctly. I'll get rid of that A real quick. Okay, so I saved that. It says may take a minute or so. I generally find it takes about 45 seconds, so we'll just let it do its thing. So it says the profile's been created, and you have to restart Lightroom before it becomes active. So let's go ahead and quit Lightroom, and we'll go ahead and restart. And then when we go there, we'll be able to see that our profile is sitting there waiting for us. And what that will allow us to do is to go ahead and create a preset, so that when we go ahead and shoot, we can have this preset, the white balance and the custom camera profile, applied to every image. So let's restart our tethered capture, get our camera hooked up. Okay, so now it's sitting there waiting, and we need to create a preset for what we're going to have assigned as a white balance. So let's go ahead and get the white balance, and you can sample off the gray or the next one in. They're all technically neutral, so let's go ahead and do that. So we've got our white balance, so now it looks nice and clean. The next thing we need to do, however, is go ahead and apply our camera calibration. That works with the white balance to make sure all the colors just jump right into place. So if we take a look at the Adobe Standard and we scroll up to our new profile that we just created, if you took a close look at the target, you saw so many colors jumped. Let's go ahead and zoom in and take a closer look at that. Alright, particularly take notice of the blue patches, a little bit of the orange, that kind of eggplant color. So watch the colors. So there's the Adobe Standard. Some of those colors have turned out to be a little bit weaker. Let's go ahead and apply our custom profile, and watch those colors kind of jump into place. Now we know that every image is going to have the color we wanted. Actually, that little kind of purpley lavender color went off a little bit too. So now we know our color is great. So we go over to the presets menu. Let's go ahead and give it a name, and we'll be clever again. We'll just call it the Bowen's Cocoon Shoot. We're going to add both the white balance and, oh, they always like to have the process version, and the calibration, which is the custom camera profile. Go ahead and create that. And now we have a preset that we can assign. So if you go into your develop settings, as each image comes in, we can apply that shoot preset that we just created. Now every image that gets shot will automatically have the correct white balance and the custom profile applied to it as it comes into light. All right, a couple great questions have come through, and thank you for these because they're really making me dig in a little bit more, and they're really important things that you're asking. First of all, someone asked, is there special software in Lightroom to do the tethering input, or can you do it with Photoshop? You can't do it with Photoshop. Maybe something that'll happen in the future. The tethering is built into Lightroom, but not completely. Even though Lightroom supports the RAW files from pretty much every camera out there, the one that's built in are Canon and Nikon. Even my Sony, I had to spend an extra 29 bucks to buy the plug-in for Lightroom. There may be others out there made by third parties. I'm not sure. You'd have to do a search on that. But the basic tethering operation is built into Lightroom. And as far as I know, it's the only Adobe product that currently allows you to do that. So someone asked, what if you don't have Lightroom? If you're just using Photoshop or Photoshop Elements or some other program for doing your editing, then you just have to do it the old-fashioned manual way. Take your card out, load it into your computer, and then import them into your software. I highly recommend, though, if you're going to do a lot of this, you should have Lightroom, because Lightroom just makes this process so easy and so automatic. And if you're doing it a lot frequently, we do it not only for this, but for all our portrait sessions as well. Having those images come in right away, there's no wonder if the images are captured okay, because they're already in the computer when you do that. So it's a worthwhile investment. Someone asked, does the Colorchecker Passport work with Capture One Pro? And the answer, sadly, at this point is no. The Colorchecker works with DNG files. It's something that happens behind the scenes. You don't have to do anything to make it happen. But Capture One, Capture NX, and some other softwares only work in ICC behind the scenes. It's getting a little technical, but the answer is right now only the Adobe Creative Suite has adopted the DNG color workflow behind the scenes, so you have to use one of those programs to use it. Someone asked, how do you go about photographing mirrored surfaces? They've got a metal shroud around a light fixture they need to photograph. I don't know how big this thing is, if it would fit in this cocoon or the big one that you'll see in a minute. But I've found that really tinting them, having a complete tint of white, translucent, reflective material, does a great job for that kind of piece. Some years ago, I photographed some jewelry for Harry Winston's in New York. 3 jewelry pieces that these guys came into the studio to have photographed that totaled $4.5 million, and they were diamonds and emeralds and things. So obviously very transparent and very reflective. By using a device like this, and any of the openings that you see here, like for shooting, were covered with white material because we didn't want any of the ambient light coming in or anything reflecting off that. Even to the point where the camera was wrapped, the lens was wrapped. You still might find you're going to see a reflection of maybe the circle of the camera lens. That's going to require you go into Photoshop or in Lightroom to get rid of that, but it does work very well. Let's see. Someone asked about where do you point the Passport? Do you point it towards the lens no matter how many lights or what direction they point? The whole idea of creating a custom camera profile with the Passport is it needs to be underneath the light that is going to be illuminating the thing you're taking a picture of. So if you just put it in the same position that the object's going to be in, that's going to give you a correct profile. Understand that a profile is different. It's above and beyond white balance. White balance gives you neutral. A profile then corrects for deficiencies or extra bumps of color in the spectrum of this light. You'll find some lights have very strong spikes of certain colors and are weak in others. Standard fluorescent tubes, for example, have a strong green spike in them. Your eyes can't see it, but your camera does. What that ends up causing is a deficiency in magenta. A color profile with the Passport will fix that. Just again, make sure it's in the same light that's illuminating the subject you're going to photograph. And to that, someone said that they calibrate their monitors weekly. How often should you calibrate the camera for a given light source? Well, what I found for these lights, once I created one light for the cocoon lights inside the cocoon, that's the only one I need. Because again, remember, a profile is fixing deficiencies in color spectrum. It's not doing the white balance. So if something changed, if the ambient light in the room changed, or maybe I moved the lights way back and it caused maybe the color to go a little bluer, then that might call for a white balance fix. I'll go ahead and white balance again, but the spectrum of the light has not changed. So once you create a spectrum for a certain light source, you're going to be done. Now that said, the fact that I have the cocoon here with the light shining through it is going to give me a slightly different spectrum than if I was just using the lights without the cocoon. The cocoon itself is going to add a little bit of flavor, a little bit of color, maybe boost the blues a little bit compared to then if the lights were not shooting through the cocoon. So for that case, I would create another profile. But once you create your profiles for your basic light setups, bare lights in the cocoon, ambient, daylight, fluorescent, etc. Once you have those, you're not going to have to recreate them. What you're going to have to keep doing is just have a new white balance reference. Let's see, anything else? Nope, that's it for now. So let's continue on. Now, there are a lot of techniques for small product photography, and we're just really touching on a few examples today. I have done this in the past. I'm not a master at it. It takes a little bit of practice. It takes a little bit of experience, and it's going to take a little bit of figuring out what you like. Remember that just putting the product in there is one thing, but remember you want to pose your product. Product styling is a whole technique and profession on its own. Make sure that through the lens of your camera, when you're looking at that image, that your proportions are correct, your angle is correct, and maybe the rule of thirds applies, but take some practice with it. You also may decide to use some other props and surfaces to dress up your product. There's nothing from stopping you putting decorative papers in here, for example. When I shoot jewelry, I find that stone and wood can both look great. Some others prefer to use black plexiglass or fabrics. Take a look at websites, search for images of similar products and see which looks speak to you. Or you can go completely on your own direction and completely experiment. And by the way, food can also be shot in the cocoon, or if you've got something really big, you can use a seamless background and use the exact same lights. Now for small reflective items and even bigger ones, the use of flags and reflectors can greatly enhance the look. Now when I say a flag, here's one of the flags I used in the jewelry shoot. It's just a simple piece of black foam board. I used a binder clip to hold it, and it just sits in the cocoon. And you think, what might this little thing do? Well, it gives the reflective surface something dark to shine into it, and it greatly defines the piece much more so than if it's not there. Let's head back to the studio. We're going to use some flags to give some small pieces of jewelry some extra pop. Then I'll show you how you can remove the flags in software, both using Lightroom and Photoshop. Let's take a look. See the effect of adding a couple of black flags, and you're going to see how much better it's going to define some pieces of the jewelry. So let's go ahead. Here we have this. Here we have the necklace, and this is just on a backlit background laying inside the cocoon. And what I did was I placed two foam boards on the binder clips. It's darkened up both the side of the big piece and added some dark stripes on the inside of these gold pieces. Let me open this again so you can see the effect. Now, very quickly and easily, you could do it either in Photoshop or in Lightroom. Just get rid of these black pieces and you see the final piece. So there's after the black flags are put in, and here's before, and you can see it's added some depth to the image. Let's take a little closer look in this as well. So here we see a zoom in of the same piece, and here is again backlit, but without the black flags put in. When we add the black flags, take a look particularly on the gold piece here and along the side of the big pendant, and watch to see what happens. You can see adding those little black pieces off to the side that reflect into these surfaces give them a lot more depth. Look at that. Look how much dramatic that is, and it really makes for a nicer image. Should have known you weren't going to let me off that easily when I just said you could remove these things in Photoshop or Lightroom. So let's go ahead and take a look in Photoshop first. There's a couple different ways that you could do this. Let's first try using the patch tool. And with the patch tool, you just kind of draw around. I like to get kind of close. Draw around the object, and then you can drag where you want it to sample from. It could be really anywhere. You just don't want to get some other object in there. So let's pull it over here and see what it is that it does.
Alright, that did work, but we do have a little bit of a gradation going on here because it was lighter towards the edge than it is closer in around here. Actually, we'll fix that another way. Now, you also decide, well, do I need to crop this image? Do I really need this stuff all the way out there? Answer probably is no. But since we've got this other piece here, let's go ahead and bring it over and let's just try another way. You could always use the stamp tool. You could also use the lasso tool. Oops, I missed a piece. So I'll hold down Shift and get the rest of that. Okay, so I could try Edit Content Aware Fill, which is probably going to be pretty much the same result as using the Patch tool, because on CS6, the Patch tool added the Content Aware Fill function. And that actually did a pretty good job. Now, just to show you one other way, I'm going to undo that. Let me just show you one other way. Now, you could also not select any of this, and you could go get your stamp tool. Give yourself a nice big brush. And what I recommend when doing something like this, when I'm painting from something lighter onto darker, I'll change the painting mode from normal to lighten. That way, if by chance it does go over something that is lighter than where you're sampling from, it will leave it alone. So I just sample from where I am, go over onto the piece to get painted over, and in that case, that does a nice job. Now, remember I mentioned we have this going on here as well. I'm going to put it back to normal and bring down my opacity to 50%, and I'm going to sample over in this light area, and I'm going to paint a little bit over top of where that gradation was, just gently to have it fade from the almost pure white into that very slight cream color. And there we go, they're all gone. Okay, so here's our same image. We've got these big flags in here. What can we do to get rid of them if we just want to stay in Lightroom? Well, in Lightroom 5, the spot removal tool does have a new option, and that is it lets you actually paint areas. You can just hold down your mouse and draw over top, and it will then go find an area to sample from that it thinks is right. Now, if it turns out not to be right, by the way, you can click where it's sampled from and drag to somewhere else. If you think there would be somewhere else that would be better, maybe it picked out something underneath. Also, in the tool, you do have heal and clone. Heal is generally what you want to do. If you do clone, it's actually going to literally copy from where you go to the new spot. So this is still an active tool. And while I'm here, let's just go ahead and do another one. I'll paint over top of the second board. And let's see where it goes ahead and samples from. In this case, it came in a little bit. Let's see if that was enough to make it happen. And it did. And there you go, there in Lightroom. Now that you see, we've also got a little bit of smudging over here. If you could see some of the, let me back off a little bit. You might be able to see a little bit of places where it was casting a shadow that I missed. So sometimes you want to go back over. I can just add, you just go outside where you just missed. I'll add from there. And actually that did a pretty good job. I've got some pieces over here as well. Let me get rid of those. Might have some spots around on my image. Now in this case, it went and sampled from down underneath where it already was. I can just hit done, and there we go. All our black flags are now gone.
All right, a lot more questions, so let's get right into them. First of all, someone asked the question, does it have to be Lightroom 5 or do earlier versions have tethering? Lightroom 4 does. I can't speak before that, but it also is tied in with Adobe Camera Raw, so you want to make sure that your camera's files are supported. That might determine what version of Lightroom you need to have. Someone asked, they have a mini color checker. Will that work for camera calibration also? The answer is absolutely. If you have a mini color checker or a full-size color checker, they all work. The software is a free download from xritephoto.com, so if you don't have the Passport plugin, you can download it for free from there. Someone asked, do I need to create different profiles with the Passport each time you retake a grayscale or white balance and meter readings? So like, for example, if you're doing a model shoot where you need to create profiles for different clothing and different light. if the light source, meaning the type of light has not changed, you do not need to create another profile. If you're going to move lights around, you may need to do white balance. You're going to need to meter, obviously. But for example, if we're using studio lights, the spectrum of the studio lights isn't changing. It's always the same. So once I create a profile for my studio lights, I'm done creating profiles for it. Where I might need to redo it is if I'm doing outdoor environmental portraits, mixing flash and ambient light. Then the percentage of the flash and ambient might vary a little bit. For that case, I may need to create a profile for that. But really, you need a profile for each light source, not every time you shoot. Let's see, someone asked, any tricks on how to shoot semi-transparent objects like crystal beads and get a perfect white background without getting the light underneath to wrap around the product? Good question. With the cocoon, there's a couple of things. It can be actually fairly easy. One thing is just take the backlight or the bottom light and move it further away so it's not as intense, and it'll give you a nice light through those transparent objects. One of the pieces that I photographed just the other day, you'll see it in my ending slideshow. It's the last image of a glass plate that had transparent pieces in it with little swirls of color in it. Turned out to be a bear to photograph. And what I ended up doing, because there were pieces in the clear that were reflecting off the bottom, I actually ended up using some clear bubble pack underneath the plate to raise it up so that it wasn't reflecting off of the white surface underneath. Takes a little of experimentation, but that's the fun of this. You're going to find certain tricks and things around the house that are going to help your photography. Someone asked, how do you measure the light from underneath? The short answer is you really don't have to. What you need to do is measure the light hitting your object. So for example, if I have my meter, I'll just place it right in front of the object horizontally and take a reading. Whatever number that gives me, that's the number I put in the camera. Typically, the underlight isn't adding a lot of light to it compared to these lights coming in from the side. The underlight is getting rid of the base without adding too much light on the piece itself. If you want, you can actually hold it in front of the piece, pointing back towards the camera, and get a reading that way. Again, experiment a little bit. It's going to be determined by the exact placement of the light and how close that underlight is to the base. If you have it right up against the base, it's going to have more of an impact. If you have it down below, where it's illuminating the bottom but not contributing too much extra light, then you're not going to really have much of a metering change. Someone asked, what do I see the advantage of continuous light versus flash? Now, you guys know that I'm big on studio flash. I'm big on flashes. And one of the things about flash is, as bright as these things look to the eye, they're maybe a tenth as bright as a studio light. So if I need short flash duration, I need short light duration, I need a decent shutter speed and depth of field, you're not going to get that with a continuous light. However, for photographing objects that aren't really going anywhere, shutter speed is not an issue. And the beauty of continuous lights is you're seeing exactly the effect of the lighting and the lighting patterns you have on the object at all times. So you can move your light up and back, you can move it up and down, you can add flags, you can add reflectors, and you're going to see the effect right in the camera real time. That's what I really like about that. Let's see, someone asked, do I use a mirror lockup for taking these photos? That's an excellent question. If I was still using Canons or Nikons, the answer would be yes, because this 1/13 to a 1/10 of a second exposure is a dangerous shutter time for cameras with mirrors. When that mirror comes up, it can cause a little bit of shake. If you're faster than a 1/30th of a second or slower than, say, 2 or 3 seconds, the mirror isn't usually going to cause enough of a problem. But in that range, 1/15th of a second to 1 second, it can be a problem. However, again, not something that concerns me anymore because of the cameras I use. The Alpha 99 has a fixed mirror. It's called a semi-transparent. It never moves, so there is no vibration caused by it. And I do find myself switching over a lot to mirrorless cameras. Most of the images you're going to see in my final slideshow, with the exception of the violins and some of the ones you've already seen, were actually all shot yesterday with the Sony NEX7. This is a mirrorless camera, so those intermediate shutter speeds and slow shutter speeds are not affected at all. But good question. Someone asked, how long will a Colorchecker Passport last? Do the colors fade with time? Like anything with color, yes, they will fade with time. Understand this is not actually a printed piece. This stuff on here is actually more like a paint. So if you keep it enclosed in its case and you keep it protected, it'll last a good long time. If you leave it open on the dashboard of your car on an August afternoon, then all bets are off. Use some common sense with it. I would say a couple years is going to be fine, and then you might want to look at replacing it. If you spill something on it, like your coffee, you're done. You have to go buy a new one. Let's see, anything else? Someone asked about what about photographing items that are non-reflective, say woolen items like a baby sweater. Another good question. More an issue when they're darker. It's kind of the same as photographing pets. You're going to find that things that are non-reflective have a tendency to need a little bit more light. So if that's the case, and again, a little experimentation will be in order. When I meter for, like if I'm photographing my dog, I will overexpose typically 1/3 to 2/3 of a stop. If I'm photographing an animal that's got a dark fur, then I'll go 2/3 to a full stop because that fur does not have the same reflective properties of other things. So I would say that would probably be the same thing with something like a fabric or a sweater. Very good question. A couple of you asking some specific stuff about cross-polarized lighting and about doing giclée reproduction. So if you want to photograph artwork, for example. Kind of a different still photography kind of work. I've done that in the past as well. Above and beyond what we're talking about today, but I'd be happy to help you. You'll get an email when we're done, and send me a question. I'd be happy to answer that off the set. Okay, let's continue on because we're getting short on time here. We've been photographing pretty small items. Wouldn't it be nice to have the same beautiful light to be able to photograph some larger items? Well, it turns out the Cocoon has a big brother. This is the 70 medium. There's also one called the 130 large. Let me go kind of bring it back here. I'll just roll it onto the set. Kind of give you a sense of how big it is. Yeah, it kind of looks like Mork's spaceship. I'm dating myself there. But, I mean, the thing's pretty big. I could practically fit in there. You can use the same lights. In fact, if you had both of these, and this Cocoon is not that expensive, if you have both of them with the same lights, then you can have all your products and be photographed kind of the same way. So to use this, what I did was I had a series of violins that I needed to photograph. So let's take one last trip back to the studio and use the big Cocoon for some great musical instrument shots. By the way, before we go to the video clip, I'll apologize. I understand some of you were having some audio issues. It has nothing to do with our resolution. As it turns out, there's something else going on with the broadcast. If it's affecting you, no worries. If it's driving you nuts, when we post the full video, that'll all be gone and you'll be able to watch it in silence. So let's go back to the studio and see the big Cocoon in action. So what happened to our Cocoon? It's grown. This is obviously the large Cocoon from Bowens, and obviously for photographing larger stuff, I could practically fit my derriere in here. But what I'm doing instead is I'm actually doing a personal project as well. As part of my father's estate, he left us half a dozen really nice fiddles. My father was a violinist. And we need to find good homes for these. In fact, the one we're photographing right now is, I believe, an early 19th century rather, German violin. So we're going to take pictures of that and send it off to get them appraised. So the whole process is exactly the same as we did for jewelry. I made one change. I've got the two lights, same two lights we're using on either side. What I've done also to add a little dimension to it is I put another light, a third light, instead of being underneath, now it's behind, and what it's doing is it's kind of creating a little bit of a glow around the waist of the violin that just adds a little extra dimension. Metering, the lighting has changed. The Cocoon has changed, so I do need to remeter. I've got my Sekonic 308. All I need to do is just kind of shove it in the middle there, hold it out horizontally, and it tells me at f18, I'm at 1/4 of a second at 100 ISO. That's my number. Now, a couple of these violins are darker wood, and sometimes when you're shooting something darker, it pays to open up maybe a third of a stop just to open up those shadows a little bit. This violin is a little more of a blonde color, so it's this one I'm going to go right with the default reading. The violin in the Cocoon right now is a little darker on the front, so for that one, I'm going to open up 1/3 of a stop, again, just to open up the shadows. I don't need to recreate the color profile, because the lights are exactly the same. It's the same spectrum of light. Nothing has changed other than it's in a bigger cocoon. So I can use my same preset that I was using for the small cocoon for the jewelry. And I've got up here an armature set up. I've got a C-stand with an extension arm, and we just have a piece of wire looped down that is hooking on to the top of the fiddle. And that is holding it in place. So it's kind of floating in midair. We'll do the shot. I'm shooting it vertically. I'll frame it out. And then I'll just go into software, either Lightroom or Photoshop, and just get rid of those wires. That'll be just a snap. And we'll have some beautiful pictures of some really beautiful instruments. So let's give it a try. So what's going on here? Why does this work so well? Well, unlike as if I just had this out in front of a seamless background, I've got this entire cocoon, this entire tent around the pieces. And as you see from the video, the violin's kind of in its in a place where there's both specular directional light and light coming from everywhere exactly at the same time. That's the beauty of this, because I've got lights going through this translucent material. Then when it goes inside, it's bouncing around. So there are hot spots, there are bright spots, and then there's an evenness to the light at the same time. I can change the reflections and where the highlights occur just by moving my lights back and forth a little bit. Also, for the light in the back, again, that was my personal preference. I could put it up top, I could put it in front, anything I want. There's also diffusers that come with the lights, kind of like, that looks like a shower curtain. Yeah. What do you think? Nah, I don't know. That these fit over the front of the lights that will further diffuse. So if you were doing some small objects and you didn't want to use a cocoon, you can just use the lights with their diffusers. It becomes like a small softbox at that point. But if you want that complete wraparound light in a system that's really easy to use and really effective, the cocoon really will do it. And this system really is designed to work well. Now, this big one doesn't come with a stand. I actually have it on top of a Black & Decker workmate. And it's actually the perfect height for what we're doing. So get the lighting out of the way, get that color correct with a color checker, use a meter. Don't trust your camera's meter, because in all this light stuff, if you go by it, it's going to grossly underexpose it. And just get down to shooting, and it just allows you to do production. If you have a lot of items you want to put up on your website, on eBay, on Etsy, wherever, you can just do production. You can just keep them going. Once everything's set, you don't have to worry about it, and you're going to get great results. And that's the whole idea. This is going to allow you to get great pictures of your stuff and allow you to sell more. What could be easier? So a couple questions, and this is a good one. Someone asked, how do you photograph reflective items without catching your camera in the picture? Good point. Partly has to do with angle, actually the angle of the reflecting surfaces, and sometimes it's going to be slightly unavoidable. First thing you do, again, there's 3 holes in the cocoon, one through the, at a 45-degree angle, one from the top, one from a low position. The 2 that you're not using, first thing I do, cover them over. Put a white reflective material like the cocoon, could even be paper. Sometimes it's going to be unavoidable. You're going to have to be careful about the position and the angle of your product. But that said, you might still have to go in and get rid of your lens. You might see the circle of your lens somewhere show up on the piece. Now, one of the beauties of something like Lightroom is if your product is always kind of going in the same place and your camera's on a tripod, that lens is going to show up in the same exact spot in every picture. And what you could do is do an adjustment in Lightroom so that that spot is always removed. It's something that can be done. And stay tuned. I'm actually going to be doing a Lightroom webinar coming up. I'll talk about that there. Someone asked, how easy is it to clean marks in the cocoon if you drop something? It's pretty easy. It's a pretty rugged material. It's a very heavy plastic. I do keep a little dust gun, can of dust, canned air to clean it out. Also, if something still shows up, again, you can use the cleaning tool in Lightroom to automatically go to that spot because it's going to show up in the same spot every time. Fix it on one, and then you can sync it, the spot removal, to fix on every one. Someone asked if I had tried light painting from outside the cocoon. Good question. I haven't tried that yet. Someone asked about focal length of the lens. Now, I did talk about in the video and in the metering. I was using from f/18 to f/20 most of the time. Do you need a macro lens? If you're doing really small stuff, might not be a bad idea. However, again, this is a 24 megapixel camera. Most of the stuff that's going to be prepared for online is going to end up, what, 800 pixels? Maybe 800 pixels wide for a big image on a website or on eBay or on Etsy, where this camera is capturing 6,000 pixels across. So, did I need a macro lens? In this case, the answer is no. And by being a little bit further back and going to f/18, f/20, I was able to capture the sharpness from the front to the back of all the products with no issue. If you do go to macro, that can be really cool for really small objects, but just understand when you go to macro, your depth of field becomes very, very tiny, and it's going to be very difficult to get the entire product sharp. That may or may not be important to you. That's a personal thing. Let's see. Someone asked what kind of lights are in the Bowens kit. They are fluorescent. They're CFL fluorescent tubes. Let's see. You can go onto the Bowens website and it has all the technical specifications about the wattage and all that kind of stuff. It will take care of that for you. Okay, let's continue on. A couple more things. Now, this was a lot of fun for me. I hadn't done much product photography for about 10 years, since my days when I worked in New York City. I really had forgotten how much fun it could be, and that with the right tools, it was both easy to do and really provided exceptional results. So let's take one last look at the tools we use today. First, Sekonic meters. Again, I had two of them here. Someone asked they wanted my green Sekonic meter. Well, you could check on eBay, but they are gone, and I do love this. Barring that, I've got my Sekonic 478DR, or you can still get the 308S in black. This will provide perfect exposure for every time. You cannot trust your camera's meter for stuff like this because depending on how close you are to the product, how you've got your lighting patterns, you've got all this light in here, it's going to overexpose, or it's going to underexpose if you've got a bright white. If you put something on black fabric, it's going to grossly overexpose it. So having a meter will give you that repeatability. Colorchecker Passport. We've talked about that. When you create a profile for your lights, it will fix any spectral issues as well as the standard Adobe Camera Raw that exists both in Lightroom and in Photoshop. Does have a tendency to cost you some blues. And with the cocoon, I found myself losing a little bit of lavender and orange as well. This put it all back. A camera that can shoot RAW. Now, is this absolutely critical? Can you get away with it? Yeah, you can. You can just do a white balance. But you need a camera with RAW capable of shooting RAW in order to be able to use the Colorchecker Passport. Lightroom for both Windows and Mac computers. It's a relatively inexpensive program, but it's very powerful. It's a great image editor. It's a great batch processor. It's a great image database. And lastly, of course, our Bowens Streamlight Cocoon Kit. This is the piece that made that diffuse bath of light that illuminated all our products so beautifully. And really, to sum up, the bottom line is that when you're presenting your products online, the image on that website has a great influence on a potential customer's buying decision. Treat each item's photograph as a portrait and pay attention to light patterns and reflections. That care will pay off. Before we finish up, I'm going to show you a little closing slideshow of examples I've shot over the past couple days, both with the Alpha 99 and the NEX7. Let's take a look. that last piece of glass, that bowl plate was the one that gave me the most trouble, and that's the one I ended up putting, not the packing foam, but the, what's that, bubble wrap underneath it to get it up off of the white surface so that those little circles inside the transparent part didn't cast shadows underneath. It was great. Now, if you're currently selling online or you want to get started, having a way to produce great images of your products is really essential to your success. We've taken a look at some great tools. It makes producing great product images easy and repeatable. And as I mentioned, we'll send everybody a follow-up email with links to everything we spoke about today. Before we go, I'm going to do one shot live just so you can see it. I've got my Sony Alpha 99 hooked up. I've got it tethered in. I've got, actually it looks like dessert ready to go. So I can either use my cable release, which I've got right here, or I could actually shoot it right from Lightroom. In fact, let's go into Lightroom a second. So here you see Lightroom. Here you can see I've got my Alpha 99 connected. I've got my preset already created, and I can just hit this button to take the shot. In fact, let me go ahead and do that. Hit that button, it takes the shot, and our image will come in with the correct white balance, the correct color. Let me just go ahead and crop some of the extra out, and you can see we got a really nice image of, let me get rid of the camera there. So there we go. Really nice image of dessert. And that's really how easy it is to do. In fact, let me do one more thing. Jen, just show my screen one more second. Just to show you how good this stuff is. Let me go ahead and zoom in and let it reload. And you can see the resolution of these things is just crazy. Really makes for some cool images. So yeah, donuts. You think I got this way by eating salads? No. So I know that was a lot to cover. It was a lot of fun. Thank you all for the great questions. Again, we just scratched the surface. We could do many hours on specifics about photographing different items. But get the basic tools in place and do some experimenting. Treat each item as if it's a portrait, and you'll end up with some great results. So until next time, thanks for your great questions. Keep shooting, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.